Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this what I think is a very important hearing, and thank you all for all the information that you've shared. I've been listening and came up with a couple of conclusions. Tell me if I'm right. One is there is a massive, sophisticated, persistent campaign on multiple fronts to misinform, divide, and ultimately manipulate the American people. Is that accurate?
Yes.
I wanted to hear yes because nods don't go in the record.
Yes.
Let the record show everybody.
Yes, Senator.
Yes.
I think that's incredibly important because in all of this whole Russia active measures thing, a lot of the space and energy has been going into campaigns and elections and collusion and those kinds of questions. This is an enormous part of what's going on, and it worries me that we've sort of lost sight of this. Second thing I've learned from you is, number one, it's still happening. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely still happening.
Yes.
It's way beyond election.
Yes.
Secondly, it's more sophisticated than it was in 2016. They're learning to hide their tracks, not pay in rubles. That I would have thought they would have figured that out before, but more sophisticated. And then finally, it seems to me what you've been suggesting is we're asymmetrically vulnerable because of the First Amendment and democracy. We believe our whole system's based on information. And we have this principle of open access to information. Thomas Jefferson said we can tolerate error as long as truth is free to combat it. Thomas Jefferson never met Facebook, I might add. But would you agree that we are particularly vulnerable because of the nature of our society?
Yes.
Now, this one's for the record because I think it is a long answer. It seems to me there are three ways to combat this. And the first, and this is what I would hope you would supply for the record, technical solutions. Things that have been mentioned today that we could do and that Facebook could do or Google or Reddit or Twitter, whoever. Technical solutions, identifying bots, for example, those kinds of things. Please give us some specificity and things that you think we might be able to do without violating the First Amendment. I shudder when I hear the words regulate the internet. I don't want to do that, but there may be things that we can do that could be helpful. The second thing, it seems to me, and Dr. Helmuth, you mentioned this in your testimony, we need to do a better job of media literacy. I had a meeting just before, in the fall of 16, with a group of people from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And I said, what do you do about this problem with the Russians' propaganda? And you can't unplug the internet, you can't unplug your TV. They had a very interesting answer. They said, the way it works over here is everybody knows it's happening. And therefore, when something like this comes online, people say, oh, it's just the Russians again. We haven't gotten to that point. Dr. Helmuth, is that what you mean by improved media literacy?
Yes, precisely. To be able to recognize these instances when they appear, and to be able to process those in a way that can minimize the impact.
But that goes, it's deeper than just having a hearing. This has got to be, where our kids are growing up with these devices, but not necessarily being taught how they can be manipulated by their devices. I think there ought to be standardized courses in high school called digital literacy. And increasing the public's awareness that they are being conned, or that at least they're potentially being conned, and how to ask those kinds of questions. Ms.
Senator, I
Rosenberg?
think that's right. It has to include online literacy as well as just your standard media literacy, but it also can't just be in the schools. One of the things we know from research is that, in fact, it may be that older populations who are not growing up with technology may, in some cases, be more vulnerable to manipulation by this kind of activity.
I would argue that's because they grew up with newspapers and they have this unspoken assumption about editors and fact checkers.
I think that's probably right, sir.
And if you do your website in Times New Roman, people
Yes.
give it some credibility.
Especially if it's your friend sharing it or somebody you believe to be your friend.
And your friend may be sharing something which they got from somebody that they didn't know where it came from.
Absolutely.
Final point, and I think you've touched on this, is deterrence. Ultimately, we cannot rely exclusively on defense. The problem thus far, it seems to me, is that the Russians in this case and others see us as a cheap date. We are an easy target with no results. Nothing happens. And that would be something I hope you all, again, could take for the record because of a lack of time, to give us some thoughts about deterrence. And I think it's important. It doesn't have to be cyber. It could be deterrence in a number of areas, including sanctions, as we've discussed. But there has to be some price to be paid. Otherwise, as we now know, it's going to continue. So give me some thoughts on deterrence for the record. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.